Gary Fox, Development Director, Town of Rockingham, and welcome to the second public session of the area plan, public input. So the island area and under the hill, we had a couple of focus groups in a public meeting in June. The folks gave input on what they'd like to see in the areas. We had a presentation on the brownfield contamination and the properties and the constraints. And Stevens and Associates has come back with some sketches of our ideas. And we're going to walk through them today. There's, Mark Westa is going to present them from Stevens Associates. And we're going to vote on them. So folks on Zoom, a majority of folks here are on Zoom. When we get to the voting, you'll be able to participate through the chat function, and we'll get your votes up on items there. And so thanks for your time, and turn it over to Mark.
Thank you, Gary. Hi, everybody. I'll try to split my attention between the camera and you all. I'm Mark Westa with Stevens and Associates. I think Gary gave a pretty good overview of where we're at, but we did kind of go through a process of walking the site, mapping things that we really liked about it, some constraints that were out there. We had the public meeting where we gathered quite a bit of input on preferences. That was a really successful day, lots of different discussion. And after that, we started developing design alternatives. We developed quite a few of them. You may have seen them sort of in the background of the poster that was used to kind of talk about this meeting. And we worked with a few people here in town to kind of refine those and come down to 4 different ideas. So the purpose of the meeting today is really to present those ideas to you and then to kind of go ahead and get your feedback on that. As far as ground rules, which are kind of the next thing on the agenda here, I think probably the most important thing is that you let me know if you can't see, if you can't hear me. People on Zoom, same thing. Please, give me a message through the chat so that we can make sure that everybody is kind of seeing things. I do have some smaller copies, so you in the audience, if you would like those, I don't have enough for everybody, but I have several so we can share. Also, if you want to move up closer, please feel free to do that. I think another important thing about this, I'll hand them out. Is that, we want to think of these as sort of broad ideas. I do recognize that this is your community, and it's also in some cases literally your own property, possibly. So they're broad ideas that I hope different people see different possibilities and see the positive aspects, and possibly we start talking about combining ideas. We like one thing from A and one thing from B, and that's really kind of the goal, I think, is to find things we like, sort of dismiss the few things that we don't like, and be able to sort of focus on a single plan, moving forward. So that's kind of an important thing. We will go through, I'll present the different ideas, and at that point, what I'm really looking for is sort of clarifying questions, make sure everybody understands what we're doing and where we're at. There will be a time for sort of general discussion about it, and then there'll be a time when I ask you all to maybe do a little voting up here, so that there'll be different ways to communicate and get your preferences and kind of see where we're at. Is there any questions about kind of those basic ground rules and ideas?
Someone indicated that there was a reverberation while speaking. I don't know if that's anything that might just be a small room, that's what it is.
I put echo cancellation on aggressive, so whoever said that, is it better?
Is the sound any better out there?
No.
No.
Not for me.
Well, I don't understand why you're getting an echo. Is anyone, Gary, is your mic on?
Nope. Can other folks hear okay?
I can persevere. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I guess the next thing on the item is sort of the status, and we have sort of covered that a bit. But I think, the goal here is to look at these options, make some decisions, start heading towards a preferred plan, if you will, with the idea that then we're going to elaborate a little bit on a few individual sites and kind of wrap up the project, in kind of the near future. So this is a really good opportunity to provide input as we're kind of thinking about, what the plan that we will be kind of coming up with really is. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was sort of aware of that. So I guess with that, I'll just kind of jump into the alternatives. And like I said, I will hand out a few copies. Maybe people can pass them back and forth a little bit if they want.
Which one are we looking at, Mark?
So this is the industrial focus one, which is this one. So Gary's going to put that up on the screen for people in the Zoom world. I'll wait a second for that to happen. Good. All right. So this one really looks at, so one of the preferences we heard during the earlier meeting was this idea of, returning the island to a fair amount of industrial uses. Obviously with the brownfields contamination and other issues, it kind of has that history and is in some ways suited to that use quite a bit. Also, we heard things like the desire for jobs. So this idea of kind of industrial development, which could be all kinds of different scales or possibilities. It could be light manufacturing, it could be some warehousing, it could be all sorts of things. But so in this graphic, and just to kind of orient people, we're right here in this building, so kind of to the north of the island, and here's the canal kind of coming down through, just so everybody can make sure that we know where we are. So these purplish buildings are what we're saying could be potentially sites for new industrial development. The Coda and Coda area is over here, so we're kind of leaving that alone, and then kind of infilling in. And then the other big idea of this plan is to go ahead and really look at Bridge Street and make that kind of change its character quite a bit, so that it's much more sort of a mix of small scale, shops or maybe like a country store. So there's an image down on the lower right that kind of gets at what that might kind of look like. It might be sort of tree lined and repaved. And one thing I should say is that in all these plans, we're really looking at the Wireless Bridge being open and functioning. Again, that's a preference that the town has stated through the years, and so we're kind of counting on that happening. So Bridge Street would become a much better connector for that with a whole different character, and a place that, as people pass through, really could enliven that stretch and be a very welcoming entrance to the downtown area. And even though industrial is kind of happening on the backside of that, the character as you flow through would be quite nice. Another idea on this plan is this idea of some tiny houses along the canal. And there's an image on the lower left of that kind of idea. So instead of it just being parking lot, which it is now, taking a better advantage of that area, the canal frontage, putting in some small residential kind of character and uses along that. Also, the idea of sort of a welcome overlook near the Meatland site. If you ever get out of that little parking lot there, you're actually up a bit, and if the vegetation was cleared out, you could see quite easily sort of to the southeast, overlooking like the PLR site. So that would be kind of an interesting way as people come into town from the south to kind of change that character and make that a more interesting use. The other picture, obviously in the upper right, is a sort of heavy industrial use. But like I said, the idea of calling it industrial could be all kinds of mixes of light manufacturing or other kind of uses that might be appropriate. The other kind of idea is the lower mill. That does have a strong connection to the power supply, and there are thoughts of that being kind of a user of power. So that could be sort of battery storage facilities. It could be hydroponics. It could be anything that really relies on a heavy dose of electricity using that site. So I think those are the big ideas in that plan. Like I said, I kind of want to go through all the plans, but if anyone has any clarifying questions or wants me to point something specific out, I'd be happy to do that. Is there anything online, Gary, about that?
No, but I think YouTube, but
You do?
In the chapter.
Well, we're waiting on that. To me, the gas station, the 1930s, 1940s gas station, the gas station, I hope that is being thought of as something worthy being preserved.
So there are several of these where it's kind of possibly being not preserved, and there's several where it would be preserved. So yeah, I think that's a good comment and something to be thought about.
I guess it's throwing it in if you're on hold.
Yeah, no, that's good.
okay, I think I'll set here.
All right, so I'm going to move this one over, and this.
Which one are we here?
This is the mixed-use village idea.
Residential focus?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yeah.
Just one other question. Do all of these also if the town is now doing the off-angle new bridge,
Right.
but this has the pre-existing bridge, or that's the new bridge?
That's sort of the new bridge parallel to the railroad tracks. The existing bridge here is going to be sort of renovated or replaced with an iron truss.
Iron truss as
Right. Yep. So we good? Gary?
yes.
Yep, okay. All right, so another thing we heard at the last round of meetings is kind of the need and the desire for housing options. And we combine that a little bit with this idea of the train station being there, and the fact that there may possibly be, in the future, be more connectivity, more trains to the south especially, who knows. But even right now, it is getting good rail service. And the idea is to sort of maximize the housing potential of the area. So this lightish yellow is kind of showing the sort of mixed-use, transit-oriented residential development. By that I mean on the lower floors, it could be shops, barber shops, restaurants, maybe even some light manufacturing type facilities, just artist galleries, all kinds of things. This as drawn here is a little bit more of a urban, almost like the square. It could be a series of buildings. It could be a little bit more of, like you might see some of the newer development if you go down to like an Amherst or something like that. You see these kind of, buildings that take up most of a block kind of idea. We're not really getting into the exact character, although the image down on the lower left is one idea where there's, it becomes a 3-story building. There's some shops. You can see the storefronts there, but then there's some residential above. So the exact scale isn't shown or known, but the idea of quite a bit of housing going on is really critical. But still layering in a little bit of industrial uses with the brownfields that are out there. In some cases, it might make sense to just kind of keep the land as more of an industrial use. So those are the kind of purple areas. You might see that in this plan, we've kind of taken over a little bit of Coda and Coda's land and made that creamery building into a residential building. But then the idea might be that it works out that they could do something different over here. So it's kind of just a concept, but that's what's going on there. Another big idea in this plan is this idea of sort of a loop trail. So this kind of outside red walking zone. It would be really very pedestrian focused, even kind of along Westminster Street, kind of an arrival point, possibly crossing right over the rail, above the rail, so you're kind of that height, and then you're coming across. We're showing sort of a new pedestrian bridge very close to the power facility, the Great River, where the dam, where the generation occurs. It continues up the hill, crosses Bridge Street, and kind of goes on the backside near the railroad and all the way around to the bridge that we were just talking about. So that would be really sort of a wonderful walking loop that's out there. Another idea here is that we're actually connecting, kind of the main area of town through sort of a suspension bridge to kind of this new residential development. And it's not the best picture in the world, I think, because it would be a longer bridge, but the image on the upper left is kind of showing this a bridge from 2 points across a water body. And really, I think it would change the character. You would, both of these bridges make it feel like you could get to the island much more easily. Like you could just, kind of much more connectivity and ease of getting there. So those are the big ideas. The lower mill, also, instead of sort of that power user we were talking about before, renovating that into sort of a residential, mixed-use residential building. Old mill building, really has very good bones, obviously fairly deteriorated at this time, but the potential there, both location-wise and kind of the wise, could make a really lovely space. So I think those are all the big ideas on that one. Are there any clarifying questions people want to ask at this point? Anything online, Gary?
There are more input on stuff that would be some discussion that you want to wait till after all 4 are present. So
Yeah, okay. All right.
just want to give them short notes.
Okay. The walk one. I think it was called walk. Trying to remember what I named these files. So it's a mystery. All right, so the next one is titled Walk, Culture, and Restore. A lot of this came out of the last meeting where we had kind of divided up the area into some zones, and people, by the kind of circles we drew, were like talking about how that would be very nice walking loops. So this one would not require significant changes in the buildings necessarily. It's more looking at sort of the spaces in between and what can be accomplished without major changes. So one of the big things is this idea of walking loops, including sort of the downtown area, and then, you know, kind of an inner loop that might be sort of half-mile-ish, and then an outer loop, kind of this orange area that could be sort of 3/4 of a mile. We're showing both of those as being really significantly improved on the street. So the idea kind of is on the upper left, where we're showing additional tree plantings. There could be lighting, you know, so it's more comfortable in the evening. The pavement and curbing could be improved. There could be sidewalks added, but really just focusing on improving the street and the character along the street so it becomes a much more walkable, friendly kind of place with a few different options where you could do a loop or a figure eight or kind of ideas like that. In addition to that is this idea of really trying to get to the river more, and that's this outer sort of green loop. Probably a little bit more difficult in some ways, but possibly it's showing this idea of sort of a raised crossing over the intersection of the rail before they kind of head off into the bridges, so that we're getting to the north of the rail yards and kind of skirting around. There would be sort of an at-grade crossing over here, so that would need to be signalized. And then kind of using the existing kind of road driveway that goes down to the lower mill, and winding our way, you know, sort of through the Great River Hydro facility. There is some public access down in there, so we would have to work with them, but it could kind of create a really unique and interesting way to get all the way back, you know, sort of through and around. Right? So those are all good things. So the walking loops, the other kind of idea here is, you know, recognizing the Abenaki culture, their heritage on the site. That could be, that's kind of these darker red spots. So a number of places where I have communicated with the Abenaki tribe a little bit and heard some things about wanting to have some recognition basically at this facility. So that could be some things literally inside the building or nearby, maybe outside, as they would think is appropriate. There are some known sort of burial places, so they would like those marked in some ways and kind of celebrated. And then, of course, there's the petroglyph location, which they are interested in, you know, having some, you know, recognition of, some access to possibly for themselves, or, you know, very limited. But that could be sort of an overlook from above where it's recognized, and possibly something that they could get to on kind of rare occasions. The other idea here is this idea of actually removing the lower mill because of its kind of condition, and kind of reworking that whole hillside so that it becomes more kind of restored, more natural kind of lands in the future. The images you see are mostly about walking. In the upper right, sort of a nice, you know, place space that can be incorporated into these overlooks. And of course, down in the lower left, kind of recognition of the Abenaki culture and heritage. Are there any clarifying questions about this concept? Yes, sir.
I assume there's going to have to be some kind of significant but not obtrusive barrier between the rail lines and the walking paths.
Yes.
At the moment, you can just kind of wander all over the tracks.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I don't advise it, but, you know, I have. And if you're if you're making something that's official, you know, this is a place to walk. So what kinds of design, landscaping ideas have you thought about to make that look nice, but still provide a real physical area?
Right, so we haven't really gotten into a design beyond what's here, but in this plan, like I'm showing, there is this idea of actually crossing over the top of them as an elevated idea. And then over here, it would be at grade, but it would have to be sort of protected and signalized. And obviously the railroad would have to be involved in really control.
But even like the sort of walking looks great. I mean, you know, it looks great on the map, but it's actually indicating you're 5 feet away from the tracks.
Right, yeah. Any other clarifying questions about the walk idea? All right, Gary, I'm going to go to the last one. Yeah, the Gary. Okay. All right. So the last idea is kind of focused on the canal and really making it, changing its character so it becomes very much a center of attention, and a lot of things are kind of going on connected to it. So it would look at kind of strengthening the edge of the canal, kind of reconfiguring it so it's definitely more walkable. So that might be stepped back a little ways if that's what, Great River Hydro wants. But, within the corridor right along the banks, having kind of a loop on either side where people can get through. We would see that as actually having sort of, maybe like poles on either side with lighting going across. So it becomes, very festive. It could be highlighted at different times with different lighting possibly. It could be seasonal, around the Christmas holidays, it could be one thing. Thanksgiving, it could be another. And then another idea is kind of like, in Providence, the water fire idea, where obviously we're, based on what the Great River has said about the canal, they wouldn't want actual objects in the water, but there could be something where these kind of, fire pits are elevated in the air and then they're dropped down over almost to the water level for these celebrations. That might be sort of a monthly idea. You could dream about lots of different ideas, but the idea is that that canal gets lit up, it gets celebrated, there's fire kind of going on at different times, it's very walkable, you can kind of do a nice walk around it. And then also related to that is the idea of using, kind of at this north end, just kind of across in the parking lot, in the park idea, or the park that's over there, kind of a waterfront restaurant idea. Kind of show sort of a brew pub over there, maybe turning the train station partially into a cafe, and then at the south end, using the lower mill as sort of a restaurant brewery type facility. So you're getting this whole zone, that doesn't do much to the back part, but as soon as you get to the island, it's completely different. The canal is really exciting. There's a restaurant at either end. There's coffee, there's beer. There's also the idea that you could connect down to sort of an amphitheater near the TLR land. There's pretty good kind of hills up there. It's fairly protected, so a little bit of music, not bothering anybody too much. It's kind of looking over towards the Great River Hydro facility. So it would be a pretty exciting place to come kind of just walk around, be able to go different places. Showing right along the canal where before we showed sort of tiny houses, this idea of some tiny shops. A lot of times artists or small people, small manufacturers in town, people that have a small home business, but they want to sell their wares, at certain times can rent these things or they can own them, and they're not a huge commitment like a storefront in downtown. They're just something that they can use different times of the year or different times of the day. So the images, upper left is showing kind of this brew pub idea. Upper right, the train station has a cafe. Lower right is kind of the interior of kind of a cool, funky restaurant, brewery type place. And then obviously the lower left is kind of this canal fire idea. So any clarifying questions about that? Yeah.
The tiny shops, that's where the parking lot is from.
Yeah, so it would be taking over some of that parking possibly to do something like that. Of those buildings? I'm really picturing each one of those being like almost like a 12 by 12 building, very, very small, maybe 15 or 16 by 16, but I have seen them where almost along a parking lot where there's just a whole bunch of them and people are selling, knitted things and art things and all kinds of different things. Other clarifying questions?
What you're doing is taking away 2 parking lots from downtown. You're losing the Buckley lot, and we're also losing the other lot across from the train station.
Please identify. They only can hear you, they can't see you, Pat.
They can't see me?
Just identify who you are when you talk, before you talk, that's all.
Okay, sorry, I'm Pat Fowler, from part owner of the hotel and owner of Village Square Booksellers. You're taking away 2 parking lots that are used by people shopping in the square, or employees that are in the square, plus the potential hotel parking lot where you have those tiny shops. That lot, there's supposed to be, 15, 20 spaces that were allocated to the hotel.
So, as I said earlier, these are conceptual ideas. They're meant to be mixed. I'm certainly, happy to hear comments, but I'm not taking away anything specifically. I'm promoting this idea of using that pavement for a better use. And if we do need to accommodate parking, we can think about how much, what exactly we are doing. So I'm definitely hearing that parking is important. It would be interesting to think about how much of that parking is used on a regular basis, and if possibly as part of this plan, we can still accommodate some parking, as much parking, or maybe even move it a little bit. But
what you're doing with this plan is you're totally preventing anyone from developing the hotel, because there's no parking space. And right now, there's about 15 of those spaces that are used for employees and people from the Howard block. And across the way on the Depot Street, to the north of the Waypoint Center, that lot, the overflow is supposed to be used by the BF Garage people. And it's now used for people living across the street in the Canal House.
It also, with this development, I think it's going to take away from the square, not add to the square. I mean, you're creating a square down there, and it's also definitely going to affect parking for my business, which is right across from Depot Street.
You gotta identify yourself.
Sharon Bocelli.
So I guess I would like to comment that I think the concepts and principles that are being presented are, for instance, some tiny houses along the canal is a good idea, and I think it's important to also document that there's concerns about parking available for the hotel and about number of parking spaces. And then when we're working towards a final plan, we can talk about, okay, these number of parking spaces, but is the best place to park right on a canal view? Or is there a better use? And there's some other spaces that are maybe same walking distance, some other property where parking could be developed that's as close to the canal, but not such a prime waterfront space. So good to...
People are also, Gary, this is Pat. People are also, you're expecting people to walk 2 or 3 blocks away that they're going to be staying at the hotel room.
Except that we document what's good concepts and what's bad ones and what the criteria are. So you've said that it's important to have 10 to 15 spaces for the hotel and that they be as close a proximity as where the Bridge Street parking lot is. That's what I heard. And that's good input. And then
there's more than that. We need at least 20 to 30 spaces if we're going to occupy the hotel with the number of hotel rooms that we have allocated.
Or the hotel, so it's conceptual at best.
And obviously, there's going to have to be a lot of parking if there's going to be a huge restaurant brewery. So parking obviously will get brought in. This is just like spitballing crazy, beautiful designs.
All right, so I'm going to spread the word out.
It would have been nice if some of the abutters had been involved in this planning, because obviously Sharon was not involved, nor was the hotel.
You are right now.
No, we're not. You already have your plans out here. We were not involved in the planning.
I was never told once of any meeting. I was told to watch the town website, which is a bunch of bullshit, I'm sorry to tell you.
Excuse me. We're trying to keep this discussion civil and
I'm being civil.
Positive. We're trying to be positive. This is a process. There is only one way to do this, and one is to come up with ideas and then discuss them, and that's exactly what we're doing right now.
We're discussing it.
Right.
This is the first time I was able to even attend one of these things because no one ever even contacted us to be involved in this.
And you're in a butter.
And I'm in a butter of the Depot Street Bridge.
You're here right now, so we are having a discussion right now.
Yeah,
right?
you already have these plans, and I'm not a child, so don't treat me like a child. I'm being as civil as I possibly can be with you.
Okay.
I'm telling you what our concerns are. I thought that's what this meeting was all about.
It is. So we can have some specific ideas and discussion. There are 4 plans here. So how about we talk about, is there anything in any of those 4 plans that you like? Yes, sir.
Charlie Jarrett. Well, the one I think that is doable, especially with all the talk about the Abenakis and how there's been a lot of conversation about the Abenakis ever since I've been in the community, which is over 30 years, and that it has sort of been ignored. And you brought up a walking trail that seems like that may be doable. That I think that if emphasis is going to be put on something, I think that'd be a great beginning.
Yeah.
And that doesn't look like a huge expense.
Right. I mean, it would be nice to improve the street a fair amount, but that's something that's going to happen over time anyway. Yeah.
Right. Especially because of the Bellows Bridge also, big discussion since it closed, and petroglyphs being right below the Bellows Bridge, that would bring in, I think, a lot of conversation, and a lot of people, I think, in the community feel the same way I do, about wanting the petroglyphs to be able to be growing. And I'm sure, I don't know how much the Abenaki tribe does or not, but it seems like they're somewhat interested in preserving it. And I'm sure the power company, Great River, I think it could be very helpful in all of this also. So if I were to pick one of these, that's the one I would pick. Okay. That's what I like.
Thank you.
Is this all like mix and match at this point, I would think?
I think it is, yeah.
I love the idea of tiny houses on the island. I was involved in the construction, basically spec construction of a tiny house in Bellows Falls 2 years ago, and there was a great deal of interest around that. I think that's a wonderful idea. I very much like the idea of preserving the lower mill, which is in really rough shape and getting worse every month. And I don't see a huge restaurant going in there, because I don't think there's the population density, but given the fact that it does have access to the power, professional offices or whatever, right, using that makes a lot of sense. In terms of the loop, I'm with Charlie on that, George Harris, on the idea of the big outer loop. Yes, I like that much more than the circular one, which cuts off, it effectively deindustrializes the potential for rail access to any later industrial development.
Like a short spur that
yeah. All of a sudden we're going to be crossing this path. Right. I like the idea of being outside that utilizes that totally unutilized area along the river. Right. I like that idea a lot.
Thank you. Yes.
Kelly, I'm concur with Charlie, and I also like that it includes all the development that was, all the trails that were made down in front of go through the river park, and all that things like that. I do have just a clarification question. I apologize, I was on Zoom and I just decided to try.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't visualize while I was speaking. I just have a quick question about the mixed-use village one, where the Coda property is. It looks like I just want a clarification of the beige or the tan.
So that is saying housing. So it's saying the creamery would be redeveloped into housing. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Doing something with the old mill rather than taking it down would probably make a big difference on the island. And so it might cost as much to take it down as renovate it.
Yeah.
The other thing is that it's actually the more exciting part would be having the canal lighted. I'm looking at number 3, this one right there. That's really kind of an exciting concept. Also, the one with all the trails over there is really exciting too.
Right.
I think lighting up the canal is a great idea. There's always said that the river across from the fire police station, that should be lit up. People come in and if that was lit up, holy mackerel.
Right.
I mean, I've been saying that for 30 years.
Okay.
Yeah. We get an electric company here. I mean, hydropower.
Right.
I mean, why not, right?
The thing that would be advantageous about starting to focus on the canal is that it would eventually allow for the redevelopment of the back side of the hotel building and the J&H hardware building, all those blocks. Just 40 years from now, that'll be
Hi. Hi, this is Robert McBride. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. 2 things. I would think maybe instead of the concept of fire pits or an addition, we think about fountains going over the canal, sort of like Versailles or something. They could be solar generated, water sprinkles, constantly water shows. It's not, not burning anything up. I come from California, a little sensitive to burning fires at this point.
Fair enough.
And the other thing, I don't know if Bonnie or Rick are still on the conversation, and maybe someone else could answer this, but with the bridge that's going to be on the north side, parallel to the current Rutland Bridge there that goes over the canal that they're planning on,
Yeah.
I assume that includes a sidewalk so that people could cross that bridge as well as traffic and then loop around and the people coming down from the town. So I don't know, I would hope that it has a sidewalk on it.
Gary, do you know if that's true?
I couldn't understand what you said, sorry, I was taking notes.
Does the awful lineman bridge have a sidewalk?
No, the pedestrian bridge is for walking on, and the off-alignment bridge is for driving. They're separate.
Okay.
Right, but I would think that we should encourage having a sidewalk on that bridge to complete another loop over the canal. They could come back down to Canal Street or go back up to Rockingham Street. So, you know, I think if the designs are still being done, it could be an enhancement.
Yeah, good point.
And that's a project that's actually happening. I assume.
I have just one question in terms of the new elevated suspension bridge on that. Yeah. Are you aware of back when the Waypoint Center was created, there was supposed to be a pedestrian bridge on the angle of that pointless hut in the building, and they ran out of money, so they never built it. But are you aware?
I knew it was part of the design. I never heard the out of money part.
So Robert was involved in that. Didn't they run out of money, Robert?
Well, no, there was a thought when the Exner block was developed, because the Exner block contributed money to the outside parking and development of the Waypoint Center too. There was some thought of, could it be possible to kind of slice in a pedestrian bridge that you might have entered from going down that alleyway between the hardware store building and you know, the printers building that Tony Elliott owns. At the bottom, could you maybe do it? I think they explored it a little bit and they couldn't quite do it. And they also talked to the state of Vermont, because Vermont sort of had a library of bridges that you could sort of maybe pick up and go. So there was some thought, mostly initiated by Housing Vermont around the Exner block development.
So I did read that report a number of years ago, and what V-Trans determined was that the alleyway that you come out of was too narrow, cars and people, it was unsafe, and then blind on the sidewalk where pedestrians walk. And they offered an alternative, which was a pedestrian bridge next to the rail bridge that goes into the tunnel. And that one seemed to work. It was less expensive because they were able to cantilever it with the rail bridge somehow, or share some engineering. Yeah, so that seemed like a good option, and that was safe on both sides.
So were they thinking the first bridge you described with the trouble with the sight lines, were they thinking that was a vehicle bridge?
No. So where it comes out, where pedestrians have to walk into, is a narrow alleyway between two three-story buildings in the square. Yeah. So you're walking down the sidewalk, the corner of this three-story building is right on the sidewalk. Yeah. And then I don't even think there's 10 feet until there's another three-story building, and cars come up out of there, and you can't see around the
shared development.
And then the alley itself is so narrow that one vehicle and one pedestrian is too much.
Yeah, you couldn't walk next to a car coming in, and it's quite a distance because it's the width of the building. Right. So pedestrians lose.
This is Pat. This is Pat. It's also a hill. One of the Coda trucks did make it down there, but I think the guy was scared half to death because all kinds of things sticking out of the two buildings to either side. So it's kind of steep to try to get pedestrians on.
Yeah, well, so the bridge that I was thinking of was actually at that corridor, but I was thinking it got up higher quickly, but obviously at some point it needs to hit the ground. So conceptually, it's an interesting idea.
I also, this is Robert McBride again. I think also the exciting thing about any of future development or thoughts of it is for us to really take advantage of the natural resource kind of look, walking around look at the viewpoints and stuff, you know, and I'm not saying you guys are trying to plunk things down as much. I understand this is conceptual, but I think if we kind of evolve the vision from the natural beauty and resource angles and looking at things, it's really important. You know, and like you're saying, taking advantage of views along the canal that are not necessarily taken advantage of right now, you know, and stuff, but walking the properties and the territory.
I would expand on that idea to include both the natural elements and the historic elements, any of the historic structures that are still left, including the canal itself, you know, as a historic resource. That all of those are really precious, and for any kind of a new development, having those old buildings incorporated into it will ground it, you know, and make it into the rest of the village much better than if you just try to tear down everything that's there and simply get somebody to build just a sprawling structure that covered the outdoors, you know.
And I want to just quickly add, Elijah's been taking some great photos that kind of highlight that, and Alan Fowler of the years has, you know, just capturing moments and things walking around of the village. So they're really great.
Do you have those online at all? Or?
I have posted on Facebook.
You're a cell phone ninja.
Well, go ahead, Dave.
So in the comments, Deb Wright is asking if this is an island-only BF area-wide plan. So the area-wide plan is it's a brownfields term. It's a brownfields program which looks at instead of one property, a lot of like a brownfield assessment can look at one property. The idea of the area-wide plan is it looks at an area that has a lot of contamination, and so this study is funded with brownfields money. So how do you address a whole area that hasn't been redeveloped for ages? Because like with the Robertson property, it costs $1 million to deal with the contamination, or like with Sharon's property to redevelop it. It was a huge additional cost to that. So the goal is to and it's the island and the under the hill area. So where the TLR, Wyman, Flint, and Adams Gristmill are also part of the area. They have paper mills and are contaminated, and that issue doesn't exist so much with the residential neighborhoods or the Main Street. So anyway, that's why the area-wide plan is specific to the island and under the hill.
I think one of the things that obviously it's going to take outside investment, well, any of this to happen, well, most of it to happen. And I think, you know, going back to the trail, being able to show interested investors the potential of the island and the area that we're talking about tonight would be a wonderful way to present it, to be able to actually see the river as they're walking along and saying this is the land the Adam Robinson paper mill used to exist, and so forth and so on, and give a little bit of history. And I know if I was an investor, I'd love to see it that way. I'm an investor in that.
Yeah, it seems like this might connect with a lot of other things that are going on in town right now with the Incremental Development Alliance that's been working with members of the town over the last 9 or 10 months now, as well as the current Planning Commission work on zoning bylaws and other regulations. The islands in the under the hill area might be, you know, really primed for local investors to start doing small things if it looked like there was some momentum and some interest and so forth. Obviously, a walking trail is going to be like a hard sell for a private investor. What are they going to have? You know, I mean, I guess you could make it a state park and collect money when someone wants to walk the trail, but not really not really what we want, not really feasible. So maybe for at least the first baby steps, the area-wide plan ought to think about, well, what are the things that really need to be done by a municipality or a government or something like that. Right. With the idea that as this becomes more attractive, people will want to do things. Yeah. You know, if people are starting to enjoy the island instead of going there to, you know, visit a kind of boring and dilapidated industrial area, right? It's not. Then the people who are, you know, who are living, you know, or making their business in a blue tin building, you know, might be more incentivized to do something more with the blue tin building than it is. Yeah, I think that's a good point.
I think the tiny houses are, I would say, you know, it would be possible to start with that big walking room and tiny houses. People want to own property. Post-pandemic, there's huge demand. Tiny houses are affordable for people. We've got a walkable downtown. It feels like a very natural synergistic thing.
So that's the thing. If you make it possible and desirable to do that, you don't necessarily have to have government money, because a lot of people can afford a tiny house on a tiny piece of property. Right. If you know, if the town has shown that they support that kind of vision, and that's how you get to a little bit of public money going into the area and then creating the regulations and the support that encourages that kind of small scale development, the people are very likely to come and just start doing it on their own.
Yeah. Well, I think we're at the time where we're supposed to be voting. You guys all want to do a little voting?
Yes.
And I think Gary is going to collect votes online. But the idea is to take one green sticker and put it on your favorite plan overall, if you want, and take 5, or you can do more if you want, but basically 5 orange stickers and put them by either an image or the words of what the idea is. Does that make sense to everybody?
A green sticker on one, and then
one green sticker.
Right, and then the orange ones are the ones, the parts you like.
Right, so if you look, you know.
I'm sorry, Mark, can I interrupt one second? I wasn't keeping up with the chat. There was a comment with the tiny houses that just will people be concerned about the train and the noise of the train going right by the tiny house?
Right.
So
yeah. So like if you like tiny houses, you take the orange sticker. Where are the tiny houses?
So orange are individual features that you like?
So you put it like either by the word or by the image.
how many do they get? How many are
I said 5 orange. And then if you like one of the overall plans with us, you put 1 green like on top or something. That sound fair? No, but we'll do it.
What if I really like the big blue, but I really hate the idea of removing the lower mill?
Yeah.
I guess my question is, how do you, like, what's the next step after doing that? I mean, because I think that we all have, the 5 orange stickers seem to be most important rather than the overall plan, because I like mixed use the best, but I don't like that plan for mixed use.
Right.
So there's elements of some of these other plans that I would want to incorporate into that to make that be the.
I think you're right. I
So
think the orange ones are the important ones.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just, so really you could just focus on the orange.
So what is the next step though? I mean,
So
you're taking this.
So I think for what Jeff is saying, if you put a green one on mixed use and your orange ones on the different aspects, like Charlie was saying earlier, it's mix and match. Right, so a bunch of concepts where things end up going can be very different than what's on these diagrams. These are the types of things where,
So this is guiding your next plan?
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is boil this down to one plan, and I would do it by this idea of mixing and matching. So I think the orange ones are kind of the important one, but as Gary was saying, if we get a whole bunch of green dots on this one, it's kind of like, all right, we're going in that direction, but we're going to use the parts from there.
But for example, mixed use and walk culture restore mutually exclusive?
No, that's
So now you need 2 green stickers.
well,
Negotiating.
You're going to show me that through the orange.
And I guess the other piece of this that I think about is, the walk, the cultural restore, the big green loop is a beautiful start to sort of an incremental development. But it's going to take some resources to get it done, and there's not a lot of revenue generation happening with that plan. So, what the village or the town has some maintenance of this at some point, and if that's eating up the resources that aren't allowing it to develop, then we just have another thing that we're maintaining. Whereas, I look at these and I say, how much does this cost, this cost, this cost, and which one is bringing in, the balance of revenue that makes it make sense?
Isn't that further down?
So,
yeah, but I mean,
so no, that's a good point. It's good to know that up front. So there's the public infrastructure. So in the public-private partnership, there could be a public building, but then there's the public infrastructure, like I think what Dwayne was referring to and what Jeff is referring to. So, for instance, a trail, there's different financing methods specific for the public infrastructure. So, for instance, what a number of towns in Vermont have done is a TIF district for the TIF funds would build the trails around the outside. They do the road work and the water and sewer work, the streetscapes, the lighting, make complete streets. So the TIF piece would fund that, and it doesn't even get into the funding resources that would do the actual property redevelopments. So, but you can't do those types of things without having a comprehensive plan. The benefit of having an area-wide plan is we can go after a TIF district and get the public infrastructure improvements that are needed to support the plan we make for the property redevelopments. So it works.
Thank you.
I think the other part is some of the subtlety is it might not be in the voting, but it's in the discussion. And I think if we vote and then have a little bit of time to keep discussing right after, then some of those ideas will be pretty clear. So let's vote.
I can't wait.
Wait a minute, guys. There's 13 people. This is Pat. There's 13 people that are watching on Zoom, and we have no way to vote. We have no way to see the drawings.
You do have a way to vote.
Basically, what I was writing in the chat, I'm sorry, I stopped writing after I said the stickers, but that you write in the chat line where you want your green sticker. And
I can't see.
And where you want your 5 orange stickers, and we'll place them there for you. And if you can't see the drawings from, I guess I could rotate through the drawings on your Zoom screen. Would that help?
Yeah, that, and then they can.
This is Robert McBride. I have a question. So are there 4 basic concepts that we're voting? Can you just repeat what those 4 basic concepts are again?
So one is industrial focus. That's quite a bit of industrial development. One is housing and residential development, quite a bit of that. There's the one that is very much focused on walking and walking loops. And then the 4th one is kind of the canal and the water fire or water cannons and, the breweries. So those are the 4 different ones. And Gary's going to put up the images again.
Well, I was going to slow you down so you could show the screen, you could explain it, and then show the next one, because that's why I drove down.
Yeah, we know what you want to wrong, right, John? So should we start?
Let's start.
Can you send the PDF via chat?
We only get 5, right? You're trusting us.
We get 8.
We get 8.
We get 8 because
can send them.
So, I really like New Riverfront Trail. That's the big new look, right?
Yeah, you don't like the overall plan, though, right?
Hell no, I hate it.
I like the overall plan.
Awful people. I like keeping this building, so I'm gonna put that there.
What do you got?
Let's see. Oh, I am kidding. Mixed use.
You missed something. That's my private mansion right here.
Yeah, so you like the overall mixed use village, overall?
Okay, mixed use.
Yep.
But I want the mixed use to encompass the riverfront trail and tiny houses.
Good.
Yeah, where are those tiny houses? Don't want to put your car
So somebody likes a tiny shop, somebody's put the tiny house. Is there a tiny house?
Yes.
Yeah.
Here. Tiny houses over here, Charlie.
Yeah, but I'm not sure I like, I like the idea of tiny houses, but not necessarily down.
All right, well, I like tiny, large industrial.
Oh, you want to help with them? That's not too bad. A place where people.
Yeah.
I like that idea.
There was one that was on.
Just going to upload the folders to Google Drive so you guys can grab them.
I remember meeting 20 years ago. I'm not telling you.
There's something like that. There's something still like that.
Is that very fun?
You can do more if you want. So I don't have to because I gave that.
So this is Westminster Street.
Yeah.
So this is the building that exists now. This is the parking lot.
Yeah.
So that building here is there's so many.
Because that would be.
It's just here, and then you could have. So I like this. I like that idea. And that building here, this is not.
That's a beautiful.
Maybe this is.
It could be nicer.
Of course it could.
It could be beautiful, especially if you're
There's so much. Is that up here? I think that's a great idea. That's not feasible. That's not Charlie?
horsepower.
You see that? That could really, I mean, in the auto village. I never really got almost garage is gonna be. That's true. So it's, I think if we could get working. That would be great. That's what I'm I can. Yeah. All right. Well, it can be a property cafe. That is, where was that? Yeah. You want, that's not real. That's not. Yes. So put it on the same line. This is what I best.
Are those all your stickers?
No. That's why I want to see how many people put on it. I should.
Oh, yeah. So you may have put two on the same line.
Oh, I did that.
All right. I think everybody's voted.
So can someone go through the chat and take the votes while I'm changing pictures? Okay, can you get on like on your phone soon? Yeah, get the chat votes to put stickers up.
Let's see here.
Can we, I don't know.
Can you just read them to me here?
Yeah, just read them. Yeah.
So can you do that on communication?
Okay, read that from the chat. All right, maybe I can read one here. Well, here's one, orange, tiny houses
evidently appreciation, and train station cafe.
So
How many times?
So I put yours on, but we're reading off the
All right, I got those.
Okay, this is thanks, Gary. It would be great if we're able to respond in a nuanced way to each plan. Yeah, there's quite a few, but let's see.
Maybe people should just unmute themselves and one at a time and.
That one there.
This is Pat Fowler. We can't see the whole thing at once, like the people in the audience. And there's more people that are on Zoom than the people that are there in that room.
Well, we're trying to collect comments as best we can, and we're happy to keep working on it in the future too. Like we could send you the plan and you could comment.
See it. We want to be able to see it. And why wasn't it available as a PDF so that we would be able to download it and look at it? It's ridiculous.
Good point.
The PDF is coming. I mean, how much, it's a hybrid meeting, guys. So, I don't have the PDF. Gary's trying to send it. Trying to get another chat.
Alex, I'm not saying that I understand technology takes time to upload because it's a big file, but that should have been on the town website so that any of the people that are watching this would have been able to download it earlier in the day.
You put the plans on the town website afterwards and then have people comment over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, sure. People vote afterwards. Yeah. Wouldn't it make more sense to have folks, we got the votes, people in the room, wouldn't it make more sense to put out a link for a survey or whatever, so everyone in town can choose?
Yeah, we can put the drawings in
you can get
on the website, and people can comment.
Yeah, you can get a broader, broader.
That's a good idea.
That's fine.
So we can put that in the chat, that the recording will be posted tomorrow, along with the documents on the town website. People can comment then. If folks are wanting to comment now, well, they can participate in the discussion as well. We want to try and
would you be able to do a Google form or a survey on the town website so people can just click on what they would like? Yeah.
I think they could just send us a note.
Oh, send you a note. Okay.
Send you a note.
Whatever you got.
Sounds easy.
Just trying to help you out.
Thank you. Well, so what I would like to do is just quickly discuss, because it is getting on close to 8, what was voted on and sort of why, or the nuances of it. There's obviously some that have 5 or 6 votes or more. There are things that we talked about before, so houses, industrial development seem pretty popular, having agricultural places, riverfront trail, canal walk with fun lighting, station cafe, renovate mixed use, residential has a few. Would anybody like to just continue the discussion or point out why they voted? Or?
I just want to say how thankful I am that we've done this and that we don't have to. I think that there's so many good ideas there, and being able to kind of see that people had, we've got some consensus around some things and consensus also around some things that we don't like.
Right.
So I think that this has been very useful in that way, and knowing that this is a work in progress at the moment.
Right, exactly. Thank you. Any other thoughts at this time? We will get the drawings on the town website or somehow, so anybody has access to them. And we will be able to take comments, via email or you could put your own stickers on them and scan them and send them to us. We're happy to have everybody's input. Yes, sir.
What is the next step?
So the next step is we're trying to, narrow it down. So possibly, I guess my thinking starts to be maybe sort of the long-range plan, which then a subset of that is sort of the short-range plan, just because I heard a lot of that kind of thinking today. But I guess we'll have to see where the voting goes. But I think the goal is sort of a single long-range plan with this idea that I really like this idea of some incremental steps to get there. So I think we would pull those out as a really good idea.
And who are the people who are taking the next steps? So obviously that occurred to me just before this announcement came out. Hey, I wonder what's happening with the area-wide plan. It's been 2 months and we haven't heard anything. Right. So that might also be if there's a way to kind of keep the community more involved on a more regular basis. Rather than waiting 2 months and some expert comes up with yet another scheme. You know what I'm saying? That might help to make people feel like they're more part of it, they have more input.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I understand. I think we are trying to, come towards a conclusion. So yeah, it's fairly quickly.
Yeah, that's the way I see it. This isn't necessarily this isn't the end point, this is only it's just a conceptual design that would probably be, picking ideas off of this for decades to come. Right. I don't think anybody should have expectations that all this is going to be happening within the next 2 years or something, not like, this isn't like we rezoned the entire area or that we're initiating, any contracts with us or anything, it's just planning process, right? Just loosely giving a general idea of the direction we want to work with as we're working on the multitude of various projects through the years.
I think it does start to highlight some ideas people like and some that we want to let go. And as Gary was saying, as this plan comes together, then there's ways to start to bring them to the next step. And that would be a stepwise thing that happens over the years. It's not going to happen right away. But having plans in place allows you to get funding and put programs in place to move forward.
Yeah, I think the important thing to remember is that this is a planning process. These meetings that we're at, right? This meeting is the planning process, and basically it's not that an expert, a consultant is going away and coming up with an involved plan. It's more that we say, okay, there's a number of things we could do. Destinations, tourist, residential, industrial. There's a lot of properties. Where do they go? What do we do? So our architect, our landscape architect, takes some plans, puts the concepts and ideas in a particular place, but Kelly didn't say, well, take my creamery building and put houses in there. But that's one of the properties. One of the ideas is residential. So as we're in this planning process, Kelly might say, no, you're not doing that with my property. Or she might say, well, what's your offer? Well, sure, we'd love to sell it and do something like that. This is the planning process. So we're not missing a process because Mark is going and taking some ideas and putting them on diagrams. So we're scoring what those concepts are and saying, we want to make sure this is in the program. And we're also taking the comments that everyone said, what are the criteria? What do we want to avoid? What's important to us to make sure that we have? And tempering those with the votes and with the ideas. And again, it's a process. We'll come back and we'll have other plans. There'll be, and as people here were saying, those go hand in hand for like 10 years anyway, maybe 12. A couple of pieces are right now, like the bridge, and certainly some of the thornier ones are 20 years out. So I guess the important thing is not to panic. We're in the planning process, and we're not done, and and you're gonna not have any parking for your, for your business. And so thanks for being here and participating. And in the next couple of days, we'll get the recording posted on the town website. The drawings will be posted on the town website, and there'll be the opportunity for input scoring over a couple of weeks' time. And that's that's all I have to say there.
We're right, it's exactly 8 o'clock, so we're right on time.
Thank you.
Yeah. So
I was just going to add one thing that, I'm with the Wyndham Regional Commission, Susan Weston. We have seen these area-wide plans really kick off redevelopment or development in a lot of areas. For example, in downtown Bennington, an entire historic block in the downtown has just been redeveloped. And it all started with one of these area-wide plans. So it can make a difference. It can attract other funding sources, whether it be from the state or other, federal government opportunities. There are ways besides a private investment, and that Bennington project was a real interesting example of the public and private sectors coming together to make that project happen. And that's just one. I'm familiar with a number of others as well, more north in Vermont and down in Massachusetts, that really the beginnings of was one of these area-wide plans. And, additional funding was used then to help clean up more of the sites and to start some of these new ideas. So that's, just something to think about.
All right, so thank you all for coming. Thank you for the people on Zoom, and we'll be getting back in touch.